Welcome to Divorce Dialogues. I'm Catherine Miller. Divorce Dialogues brings expert guests to the airwaves to talk through your divorce questions and fill in the gray areas about separating. From thinking about divorce to how to behave during divorce to what to do after, this is Divorce Dialogue. Welcome to Divorce Dialogues. I'm Catherine Miller. I'm the founder of the Miller Law Group and a trainer at the Center for Understanding and Conflict, and I am on a mission to change how people divorce and help them divorce with dignity. And my guest today is Nikki Beauchamp. She's a Manhattan-based real estate virtuoso with Sotheby's International Realty, and she brings over 2 decades of expertise and deep-rooted passion for the art of real estate in the heart of New York City. Nikki will share her insights on navigating and transforming the complex landscape of real estate from local intricacies to global market trends, particularly when you're thinking about divorce. Welcome, Nikki. It's a pleasure to have you on the show.
It is an absolute pleasure to be here.
So can you explain a little bit about how the real estate market reacts to the dynamics of market trends? And because sometimes people are like, now's a bad time to sell, spring's a good time to sell, and how that really works in New York City.
Well, I think the really important thing is that there are the sort of macro, the broader trends, but then what really matters is what is your personal situation and what are you trying to achieve? And I think in real estate, people often say that there's death, divorce, and taxes that are always ongoing. And you have to frame your goals in the context of what's going on in the market. And if you have a need to sell, you have a need to sell. If you have a need to buy, you have a need to buy. You can't solely rely on those platitudes are just BS, basically. That's my straightforward opinion.
If I'm understanding you properly, Nikki Beauchamp, then what you're saying is, listen, you got to focus on what your needs are first. And all this
First and foremost.
Right. And all this conventional wisdom about sell now, sell later, whatever the market trends are, that it's like living your life for taxes. You really need to live your life and figure it out in the context of the market you find yourself in.
Exactly. That's 1000% correct. And I think it's hard because you have lots of media attention and everybody will say, oh, the market is great. The interest rates are low. The interest rates are high. But what do you actually need? What do you need? What do you want? What do you want to achieve short, medium, and long term? Let's look at market trends and try to come up with the strategy that ultimately works for you because it's all about you and your needs.
So how do you kind of do that, Nikki? How do you help people find a strategy? Because I can imagine that might mean, well, if interest rates are high and you can't afford what you might be able to afford in a few years when the interest rates come down, so rent for a while, but hey, you know what? You're not the only person in in those shoes. So lots of people are renting. So rents are high. Like how do you walk someone through making that sort of decision tree about what the options are?
It literally starts out with a discussion about your lifestyle. What are your goals today? What are your goals, let's say 1 to 3 years from now, 3 to 5, 5 to 7, and 10 plus. So if you've just moved to New York and you're not sure where you're going or what you want to do, you don't even know if you want to stay here for more than 2 or 3 years, then it might make a lot of sense for you to find an apartment to rent, someplace that you'll be happy at least a year, maybe 2, and then you can reevaluate at that point in time. Let's say that you love New York and you absolutely want to be here. Okay, how long do you want to be here? I think I want to be here for maybe the 4 years that my kid is in college. And then I want to move somewhere else. Okay, maybe our goal is to try and find you a place where we can sort of negotiate in what your rental increases might be in years 2, 3, and 4, because you're not planning to stay here full time. Maybe you are paying, and everybody talks about how rents in New York are very, very high, which is very true. The average rent for a 1 bedroom is usually upwards of $4,000. Our vacancy rate is very, very low. But people also think of New York as just like the core, very tourist heavy parts of Manhattan. New York City has 5 boroughs, and there are people who live in all 5 boroughs. I helped someone recently find their child a studio apartment in downtown Brooklyn for just under $3,000. They didn't think that was going to be possible, but it makes sense for them. She's probably only going to be here for a year or two. You know, I had someone, my kid is coming to New York and they want to go to school here. They just got into NYU and they want to work in New York. They want to be in fashion. Okay, that now we're looking at 4, 6, possibly 10 years. Then it makes sense to think about what can you buy and what does that look like? And it's all very driven by what your goals are. And I think the challenge in New York is that if you are renting a luxury property, I have a client in the scenario now where I think their rent is about $7,000 a month. She says to me, I'm not sure if I want to rent or I want to buy. I said to her, okay, how long are you planning on being here? It's like, well, I want to be here for at least the next 5 to 10 years, and I want to keep New York as my home base. I said, well, consider that you love your apartment now. So if you stay in your apartment now and you rent for the next 5 years, that's $500,000 in rent. So and I think that's when people really start to have different conversations about what can they really do if they want to take that step.
Right. Well, Nikki, when people are getting divorced, the marital home or the marital apartment is often the largest asset or one of the largest assets. And so, a couple of things come up when people are divorcing and thinking about that. One, they could just sell it. And it's very simple, but it might not suit the needs of the family if there are still children living in that home and they want to hold on to it for a period of time. And if there's going to be some kind of buyout, in my experience, the appraisal process is very unreliable. I've had appraisals in Brooklyn or Manhattan that are literally millions of dollars apart, which is, a handful of change. And so how do you advise that people approach valuation and potential sale of properties like this during a divorce?
I think the first conversation that happens every single time is what is the plan? If there are still children who are in the home and they're going to school in the neighborhood, what are we going to do to minimize the disruption? So I have clients that will put off the sale of their home until the last child graduates from high school, because at that point they're all going off to college. We will often engage with appraisers. I will always do a CMA and say, here's what we could do right now. Here's what the average days on market are for your apartment right now. Here's what it would be if you have a 3 or 4 bedroom apartment, hypothetically. You may want to go on the market in the spring. You may not want to be on the market in the winter. Yeah, and there is some seasonality, but I think as we've emerged from COVID, a lot of that has gone a little bit out the window. But first and foremost is, what are the goals? Most of my clients are often very focused on not disrupting the family unit, whomever is still there. So often one spouse will stay in the marital home. The other spouse might rent an apartment nearby. I have people who switch back and forth out of the marital home. I have people, if they have a secondary home somewhere else or they happen to travel a lot for work, they will travel more for work and they'll sort of do that roundabout until they're truly ready to say goodbye to the marital home. And it's usually dependent 99% of the time. If there's a kid who is still in school, nothing is really going to happen until that kid graduates from high school.
That's probably true. I'm Catherine Miller, and you're listening to Divorce Dialogues, a podcast dedicated to educating people about divorce-related topics so that everyone can divorce with dignity. Subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts to be sure not to miss an episode. And I'm talking today with Nikki Beauchamp. She's a Manhattan-based real estate virtuoso with Sotheby's, and we're talking about the New York City real estate market and the challenges of divorce. And Nikki, something that happens for people a lot is they decide that one spouse is going to buy out the other person, but that person might not have enough resources to successfully refinance the mortgage. They might not want to refinance the mortgage because they have a very advantageous rate from a few years ago, and now things are a lot more expensive. What do you advise for people in that situation?
I mean, the other wrinkle in all of this is that in New York City, we have several housing types and we have what we call cooperatives. And co-ops always look very with a fine-tooth comb at finances. So the financial ability not only to buy your soon to be former spouse out, but also to be able to sustain the carrying charges of the property long term also become a conversation point. And that happens not only if you are buying out your spouse, but let's say you decide that you are going to sell the marital home and now you need to go and buy something. And getting your financial house in order is so incredibly important from that perspective because it's not just about what the banks will finance, but it's also about the particular buildings and their financial requirements as well.
There are credit challenges too. Talk a little bit about how
There are
the
credit,
divorce impacts that.
yeah, credit challenges, challenges in liquidity, challenges in your debt to income ratio. I will often have clients where if one spouse either did not work or worked substantially less or earned substantially less than the other spouse, there's a very, very wide income gap. And it becomes even wider once you separate the primary breadwinner from the situation. And it becomes also a lifestyle change. So not only are you dealing with the finances, but your lifestyle may have to substantially change because of the finances in order to, for example, stay in the city.
Have you had people move out of the city because they were just unable to or unwilling to go through whatever hoops you needed to go through to deal with all of those?
I've had people move out of the city. I've had people take that into serious consideration when they were negotiating with their soon to be former spouse, where they might be willing to compromise in other areas in order to maintain the home or maintain some control in that aspect. And I think that's the biggest challenge because to explain to someone, well, this is where I want to live. And like, okay, I understand that. But when you bought this apartment, it was based on the combined household income. And now you are now missing a high six or seven or even eight figure income. It's not the same. So we have to figure out what makes the most sense for you long term. That also takes into account what your long term post divorce situation is going to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
So
ask people, are you planning on getting remarried again? And how is that going to change your finances? So I have clients who never remarry or never cohabitate again in order so there are all of these elements and these that are involved. It's really kind of fascinating, but you have to have a lot of patience.
yeah, I
Patience
mean, I think that
is
a lot of
key.
people do co-own a property for a period of time, especially if you're waiting. Okay, we've got this period of time. We want until the children launch, or
Yes.
semi-launch. And so we want to be able to hold on to this one particular place. And the only way that we can do that in the way that we imagine is to continue to co-own for a year, 2 years, 5 years, even longer. And then we're really not changing anything, but that can be really complicated. Nikki, as you point out, if somebody remarries, oftentimes the other person doesn't want to co-own a property with their former
Yeah.
spouse.
And I think the challenge is also that, launching happens, but also sometimes children boomerang back. So
Yeah, they do.
there's also that to take into account. I have some clients in that scenario now where they have chosen to hold on to the now former marital home until they feel that all of the children are sufficiently sort of stable that they're not likely to boomerang back. And they were about to, I got a call like, okay, we think we're ready. And they were like, well, things aren't going so great in grad school. So, Jane is going to be coming back to New York for a period of time and we're not sure. I said, okay, you just let me know when we're ready and what you'd like to do.
So There's a lot of, it's great to talk about the finances and the options and all of that, but I think we're touching also on the emotional impact because, a home is often a large investment and it's often as we said earlier, the largest asset that a family might have, but it's also a home. It's not like a gold nugget or a bunch of stocks, right? Or a retirement plan. And so, as someone who works with people all the time, in the real estate market. Can you share your insights on how the emotional attachments to a home can impact that decision-making process in the real estate transactions?
I think that, especially in the case of divorce, but also similarly in the case of death, the home is that last piece. And once that's gone, once you have sold it, once you have moved out, that's like there's a whole grief process that starts all over again when you make that final decision to sell that property. And that's hard for people. And in my role, I have to allow and understand that's what people are going through. As much as they call me and they go, we're ready right now, they may not be. They may not be ready for a year, 2 years, 3 years. And it's my role to stay in communication, provide resources, and be an ear in whatever way my clients need. I'm also often in a position where I may have been, they may be longtime friends. So I have an even deeper awareness of how important that home is to them and the central role that it has played in the baby shower, the first birthday party, coming back after the bat mitzvah, after the confirmation, the Christmases, the cocktail parties, the birthdays. A home is a home at the end of the day. It might be your biggest asset for sure, but there are so many memories, and that's a very hard emotional journey for people to go through. Even when they think it's not, sometimes it wallops them like a tidal wave. And then you get the call like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm doing this. What are we thinking? And sometimes I say, look, sometimes things are for a season and sometimes they're for a lifetime. And this season is coming to a close. And think of all of the great memories that you created here. And we are now going to create an environment for someone else to come in and make this a home where they create their memories.
And one of the things, Nikki Beauchamp, that I understand to be true is that because of that attachment to the home, people often overvalue it they kind of project their love for their home onto the bottom line. And
One
and divorce doesn't stop
all the
that from
time.
happening.
Divorce does not stop that from happening. And it's look, here is what's going. I am all about the numbers. And here's what's going on in the market today. Part of the challenge is that very often when the media reports about quarterly reports, and the New York cycle is very, very delayed. So when you see in the media about the Q4 data, that Q4 data is really reflective of the market, probably end of spring to summer, because that's how long it takes for things to go into contract and close and actually show up in the closed sales data. So I often say to my clients, I know you've seen the Corcoran, the Sotheby's, all the news reports in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, but let me tell you what's going on right now in the market. This is my experience as a broker. I work with buyers, I work with sellers. I'm also in constant communication with my colleagues throughout the industry in this market. And this is what we're seeing. We are seeing that people are loving completely, top of the line, move-in ready properties. So your property, I know you renovated in the year 2000, but we're in the year 2025. Things have changed. So here are some small things that we might want to consider that might have an impact in increasing your return, or we can think about it as is, but understand how that might impact your sales price. thinking about staging, thinking about renovating, thinking about decluttering and styling. Even if we're not staging, we need to position the property so that it is appealing to the widest possible audience of your potential buyers.
Super. Really, really good advice. You're listening to the Divorce Dialogues podcast, and I'm Catherine Miller. Divorce Dialogues has been educating people about divorce and relationship issues for over 10 years. Please subscribe to the podcast and don't forget to check out our previous episodes on the podcast website, divorcedialogues.com. And I'm talking today with Nikki Beauchamp. She is a very experienced Manhattan real estate agent with Sotheby's International. We're talking about divorce and real estate issues in the city, New York City, that is. And can you talk to the listeners about how you work with the divorcing couple? Because a lot of times I've found there's a lot of suspicion. My agent, your agent, which agent should we use? How should we make sure that we're walking through this process with equal information so that everybody feels sort of a sense of mutuality, of vulnerability, and not unbalanced?
I mean, look, I think there are very often situations where each party has their own agent and that's what they feel comfortable with. And that is 1000% fine. You need to do what makes you feel the most comfortable and provides you the greatest sense of trust and comfort. And they often say, look, we like you, we've known you forever and ever, but we feel like you're also too close to us to be sort of an impartial arbiter, so to speak. And I might say, okay, but we would love it if you would recommend someone that you trust to advise us. Okay, I can do that as well. Because I'm here, first and foremost, to be a resource. It's not my job. I could sell ice to an Eskimo if I wanted to, but I don't. I want to be a part of the process that helps make it smoother and simpler. I don't want to be the cog in the process that becomes, oh my God, we had the most awful experience. We couldn't trust anything that this agent was saying. And I think because I come to things from a position of let's start with the data first, and then let's talk about what your goals are, and let's try to come up with a strategy. I would say 9 out of 10 times, I end up being the only agent involved because there is that level of comfort and trust on both sides.
It sounds like you're really taking the time to talk through the process with each of them, understand what their concerns are so that they both feel that you just understand them and their concerns. But Nikki, what are some of the common misunderstandings that divorcing people might have when dealing with real estate?
I think the most common misunderstanding, I think often actually derives from when they came into the relationship. This happens a lot in the city, I think, because one person may have owned the property prior to the other, and there becomes this sort of very agitated who paid what, where, when, and how. And my answer is let's go back to the data. Let's look at the numbers, almost like doing a forensic accounting of contributions. And then, I said, you should absolutely do this with your attorneys and you should come up with, if it's not going to be split down the middle and there's going to be a proportional distribution, you have to figure that out based on your numbers. But I guarantee you the answer is literally in your history of payments for everything. And that's one of the biggest things that comes up over and over and over again. And I tell people, I can't solve that because I wasn't there when you came up with your arrangement, but look at the numbers. The easiest situation for me is when, they bought it together, it's going to be 50-50, and that's fine. That's like a dream.
You're absolutely right that when somebody on the property before 15, 20, 25 years ago, they have renovated, they may be sold and bought and sold and bought. maybe they rented for 2 years while they were looking for the right thing. Like that is that's basically what we call a separate property credit that they're looking for and what the value is. And some people, I mean, I remember saying to a client of mine a number of years ago, do you have that check from 1977? And he came back in the next time with that yellow check, and
But I
clipped
think
shape.
the challenge also is that people also build property portfolios throughout the course of their marriage. And I think, especially as people now often are getting married later in life, it is very, very important to establish who owns what, and just create as much clarity at the beginning. And I tell that a lot now to my clients. At one client, she's like, well, I really want to buy an apartment, but I'm not sure, what if I meet someone? What do I do then? I said, well, are you going to let someone that and at that point, she literally was not in a relationship. But I said, but you're going to let a relationship you're not in stop you from buying something. I said, you buy this, you use it as your home, but also remember when you do get into a relationship, you have to think about what that's going to look like and how you're going to protect your investment in your property. And I think that's something that it's not about planning for, failure. It's not failure, it's clarifying at the beginning as much as possible.
And so how can people do that? What is your advice to people about getting clear about that? Are you talking about like a prenup
I
or
tell
some,
people they should definitely talk to their lawyers and talk about either like a prenup or, what are the terms of how you decided you wanted to move in together. Okay, who's responsible for what? Who's contributing to what? What does that look like? Talk about it. And I tell people sometimes maybe the conversations you have might tell you more about your relationship than you wanted to know, but it's good to have those conversations and figure that out early. I think, especially as more people are buying property before they are forming households and then getting into relationships and getting married, I think it's that much more important to have that clarity.
I think that's really true. Everything seems all like, oh, this is all going to work out, hearts and flowers in the beginning, no problem. And then when problems start to develop, it's hard to go back. I think what you're saying, Nikki Beauchamp, and sort of reconstruct what should have happened when at a time when both people are going to have a very different opinion about that.
Yes, exactly. And I think, if you have this conversation and my clients say, oh, I'm so worried, you're framing how you're planning to build a life with this person. So that's what this discussion is about. It's about this is what we are both bringing to the proverbial table. And this is how we are going to leverage what we're bringing to the table to build and grow our future portfolio. And the clearer you are at the beginning, if there is a divorce, maybe it'll be better, a little bit more amicable and more with dignity and with people say conscious uncoupling, all these things. I think conversation and communication is key. And I think that's where things fall apart and get very contentious. And I'm a big fan of talking face to face as much as possible. The texting thing, I just feel like that gets out of control really quickly for a lot of
It
people.
can. And plus, it turns out that we read email and I guess text communications with kind of, I don't know, the opposite of rose-colored glasses, with kind of like, I don't know, mud, mud-colored glasses,
Mud colored
right?
glasses.
And so we're always looking for someone to be dissing us or criticizing. And so just in our last minute or two, Nikki Beauchamp, if there are our listeners there thinking about divorce or in the middle of divorce, particularly with New York City real estate, what do you advise them to do like this afternoon? What should they do?
I think it is a really smart idea, whether you're thinking about divorce or not, to take sort of stock of what your portfolio looks like. And I think you should do that at least once a year. So maybe you reach out to the agent who helped you and say, look, I'm interested in understanding what's going on in the market. Can you give me a quick recap? Can you explain to me what my property is currently worth? What are the things that I might want to do if I think I might need to sell it? And have the conversations. As agents, we are fountains of information. We live and breathe this. There's a lot of information online, but a lot of it is lacking context and nuance. And the market reports are not real-time data. So you want to consult with a professional about what's actually happening right now so you can get a really clear understanding of where you might be.
I think that's really good advice. Not wait until you're 3 years into the negotiation and then figure it out.
No, don't wait. Have the conversation. And honestly, the right agent is going to be your trusted advisor and your partner in on your journey.
Nikki Beauchamp, thank you so much for your time. It has been a pleasure to have you on Divorce Dialogues.
It's been a delight.